So I'd like to thank Chris for organizing this event and all of you for coming, and also last but not least, the participants in this year's presidential election for making the study of political ignorance great again. They've certainly been a boon to those of us who write in this area, even if it's very bad for the public interest. And as the title of my book implies, I do in fact write about the problem of political ignorance and what perhaps can be done about. And the situation with political ignorance perhaps is even worse than Jason said it was. He was being generous, I think, when he said that the middle 50% of voters do okay. It's actually worse than that on a very wide range of metrics. The public knows very little about even very basic things. For example, only about a third of Americans can name the three branches of the federal government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. On average, Americans have no idea how the federal government spends its money. They vastly underestimate, for example, the proportion that is spent on big entitlement programs like Medicare and Social Security, which are actually among the largest items in the federal budget. On the other hand, they enormously overestimate what's spent on foreign aid, which is only about 1% of the federal budget, but the average voter thinks it's about 10 to 20 times greater. As a result, the average voter implicitly believes if only we cut that foreign aid or waste, fraud, and abuse, that other great standby, we could solve all of our fiscal problems. And sadly, that's not the case. I can give many other examples like this, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming, so I'm not going to go through it all right now. I'm happy to talk about it in more detail. It's also important to recognize something that's less widely understood, which is that on average, voters do a very poor job of evaluating even that information which they do know. They tend to overvalue anything that reinforces their pre-existing views while ignoring or undervaluing anything which cuts against them. And this is true not just of low information voters, it's actually even more true of higher information voters who follow politics more closely. So what can we do about this situation? There are many kinds of proposals for trying to increase political knowledge. I'm not that optimistic that those proposals can work, though I discuss a lot of them in my book. One reason why is because political knowledge has been pretty stagnant the last 50 to 60 years, even though education levels have risen enormously, and thanks to the internet and other technologies, information is more easily available to people than ever before in human history. So simply educating people or making information available to them seems not to be nearly as effective as a lot of scholars might think. So instead, what I suggest is we look not to try to make us better voters, but to try to make more of our decisions in settings where we have a better incentive to be informed. So if you're like most people, even though you guys are probably in the top 5 or 10%, most of you, in terms of political knowledge, I think still most of you probably spend more time acquiring information and considering it every time you decide what TV set to buy or what kind of smartphone to get than you decide who to vote for president or for any other political office. Now, why is that? It's not because you think your smartphone is more important than who runs the government, or that you think it deals with more complicated problems than, say, the president does or Congress does. It's because you know that when you choose a smartphone, that thing will actually be in your pocket, and you'll pull it out, and there'll be all the cool apps, and it'll work, or in the case of the Samsung phone, perhaps not work and catch on fire. So you have a pretty strong incentive to acquire relevant information and to evaluate it in a reasonable way. On the other hand, in an election, the chance that your vote will make a decisive difference in a presidential election, it's about 1 in 60 million. Jason will tell you that it might be even lower than that, but even 1 in 60 million is a pretty low odds. And while most people don't know those exact numbers, they do have an intuitive sense that it doesn't make much sense to acquire a lot of political information. And therefore, most of them, in fact, do not. And when they do acquire it, they do a poor job of evaluating it because most of them are seeking out that information not for the purpose of seeking the truth, but for entertainment entertainment value or to cheer on their favorite political team, Team Red or Team Blue or others and so forth. So what I would suggest is that we can make progress by creating institutions where more of our decisions are like the iPhone decision and fewer are like the decision that we currently make at the ballot box. That is, we make more of our decisions by voting with our feet and fewer by more conventional voting. We can vote with our feet, as in the smartphone example, by deciding what products to buy in the marketplace or what civil society organization to join. We can also vote with our feet in decentralized political systems, deciding which city or town to live in or which state to live in. There's a lot of data, a lot of it discussed in my book, which show that when we make those kind of decisions, on average, we do a much better job from an information point of view than when we make decisions at the ballot box. So I suggest that what we want to do is have a government that's much more limited and also more decentralized than what exists today, either in the US or most other advanced democracies. Unlike in the case of Jason's book, this doesn't entail abolishing democracy, but it does entail making it more decentralized and also limiting its powers more tightly than is currently the case. There are obviously a lot of nuances and possible objections, and I'm happy to get into them in a discussion. Of course, I plan to write